Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. This week I'm bringing you an interview that I recently recorded with Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. She is Belarus's president-elect, or the opposition leader in exile, however you want to call it. But she has a fascinating story, and she is an incredible campaigner and fighter who I've been watching over the years. And she's just going from strength to strength. Sviatlana's husband was actually the original activist taking on Belarus's president, Alexander Lukashenko, who's a puppet of Vladimir Putin, and has allowed a lot of the war in Ukraine to be waged from Belarusian soil. Sviatlana opposes, of course, the war in Ukraine, and very full-throatedly, as you'll hear in this interview. And she is now trying to rally around the world's support for her movement in the hope that one day Lukashenko does fall. I caught up with her in London a couple of weeks ago. This is our interview. You may recall, readers of my Substack at latikaemberg.com, that she was just in Australia. We don't really talk about that so much, but if you would like to check out that article, please do. She had some stunning appearances in New Zealand and in Australia, and I will link that article in this podcast show notes. In the meantime, I began by asking Sviatlana that even though she's an accidental politician, she's so good at it. Does she in any way enjoy the job?
Actually, not really. Maybe because of our situation. Maybe being politician in normal country, in democratic country, is interesting job. You are communicating to people, you are trying to improve conditions for society, your response to requests of your society. But being politician fighting dictatorship is really tough work because you don't have enough space, you don't have enough resources. You see everyday sufferings of the people in the country and in exile, and you have to protect your nation. And so as we are a nation without state, actually we have to think non-conventionally, to open the doors that are closed usually for movements or societies are opened for the states. So that's why we have to think out of the box, how to integrate our movement to European institutions, for example, how to formalize relationship with the countries and institutions. But of course, every day you see split families. You see that students cannot go abroad to study because dictatorship is forbidden them. You have to fight for legalization of Belarusians abroad. So you have problems with documents. So all this stuff doesn't allow you to improve countries itself because you work from exile. Dictatorship is still governing in Belarus. So being politician, especially a woman politician, such atmosphere is extremely difficult.
Do you think being a woman has helped or hindered you in Belarus?
It's always a difficult question because Belarus was a patriarchal country where women were not treated as ready for politics, for doing hard political work. But I saw how Belarusians believed in me, believed in women, and moreover, our uprising in 2020 is considered to be women revolution because when our men were severely beaten after our uprising on 9th of August, these were women who stood up for them, stood up in front of this black masked policeman, bravely with the flowers and white dresses, showing that we are a peaceful nation. We want just changes. We want free and fair elections, and that's it. And at the beginning, policemen didn't touch women, but after some time, the women started to be treated the same as men. They were beaten, they were persecuted, they were raped in prisons. So, but I see how Belarusian society is changing, and our women are showing real leadership in many organizations, in many initiatives. Maybe women are more effective on long distances because we really learn a lot from, for example, uprising children, how to survive. So, but of course, I think that after the changes in Belarus, there will be no gender inequality in our country. So, yeah, I don't know how being a woman could help me. Maybe person, women saw that when life puts you in the circumstances where you have to fight, to act, you just take your strength from I don't know, from somewhere inside. So I'm doing what I can, and I have never faced any mistreatment from men politicians on international arena, maybe because being a woman politician more normal in democratic countries. But I'm so encouraged by women leaders' unity. And I see how women politicians trying to help each other, with advice, encouraging, inspiring each other. So it's fantastic.
You obviously take great inspiration from the Belarusian people for what you're doing. But is there any other independence movements that you've studied that have taught you about how to do this job, go around the world, raise Belarus's profile, ask governments for what you need?
Look, actually, not really. I have never started any other movements. Maybe, during these 5 years, I met with some representatives of different opposition movements from other countries. But honestly speaking, I see that we, for 5 years, really achieved so much that maybe no other movement in the world achieved. And many other movements coming to us asking, how did you manage to this or that? And we're learning from scratch. We didn't know how to integrate our movement to different institutions and how to cooperate with the governments, for example. But we made many unprecedented things in many spheres. So I'm glad that our movement is inspiring other movements as well. But of course, I think that I'm so fascinated by every movement that is opposing dictatorship or opposing tyranny. And we actually may learn a lot from each other, new tools, new instruments, how to fight with the dictators. But yeah, this is our path. The situation in different countries is different, but some tools we can share.
It looks like one of the bigger achievements you've had of late has been the Trump administration. They've appointed an envoy for Belarus. They raised some sanctions, but also got Belarus to release 50 prisoners, including your husband. What has the outreach to the Trump administration involved, and how did you get them on board?
Actually, we have been working with the US administration all these 5 years. And the first special envoy that was appointed was with the Biden administration. It was Julie Fisher at that time, and she was appointed to work with democratic forces of Belarus precisely. And when President Trump came to power, of course, Belarusian topic was already on agenda in the State Department and administration. But what President Trump has done, he reached dictator in our country and started dialogue about release of political prisoners. He started this humanitarian track. Though honestly speaking, about 300 people have been released even before Trump came to power, but we encourage President Trump and State Department to continue this track because they're really securing release of people, they're saving lives, and hopefully that more people will be released very soon. We're in constant communication with John Cole and Chris Smith, who are responsible for this track, but we also remind to our American partners that we also have to follow political track, not only humanitarian, because while releasing people, we have to keep in mind that political situation is not changing in Belarus. Now it looks like revolving doors. Some political prisoners are released, twice more are detained. So we have to make sure that changes that we are trying to achieve in Belarus are systematic, they are irreversible, that repressions are stopped, that a kind of dialogue between the democratic forces and pro-regime structures are started. And we encourage our American partners, to follow this track as well. At the moment, until repressions are stopped, all the sanctions have to be in place. Now, President Trump is using carrots in his policy, but America is a very powerful country and they have sticks as well. So if everything goes wrong, or if Lukashenko will try to fool the Americans in this attempt to release political prisoners, so there are instruments to punish dictator and to make dictator to change the behavior.
Human rights is not really an argument that carries very well with the Trump administration. Is there a flaw to that in getting the Trump administration to continue the pressure on Lukashenko?
Look, I see, first of all, that the issue of political prisoners in Belarus is maybe the only humanitarian issue or issue of political prisoners that's on the table of President Trump. He's personally involved in these releases. And of course, it might be a really success story for President Trump, and who knows, it might be even, it deserves Nobel Peace Prize award for sure, releasing people. And of course, what's going on in the USA regarding democracy, it's of course up to Americans to decide. But we have to keep interest of present administration of the USA, to keep interest on Belarus, to keep interest on Ukraine, and to encourage them to bring just peace in Ukraine and changes in our country. So we are doing our part of the work and hope that we will inspire the USA to continue this track.
Have you gone so far as to nominate President Trump yet for a Nobel Peace Prize?
Look, actually, one of our political prisoners is Ales Bialiatski. He is Nobel Peace Prize winner. And as we know the system, Nobel Peace Prize winner can nominate people for Nobel Peace Prize award, so it might be the case.
Very well put. What would really hurt Lukashenko? What is it that you really need to be applied in order for him to buckle?
At the moment, Lukashenko is very fragile. He is fully dependent on Russia. Here, I want to underline that we have to distinguish Belarusian regime and Belarusian people, because this is Lukashenko who is pushing our country into dependence from Russia, despite against the will of Belarusian people. So we are pro-European nation. We want to return to a European family of countries, and we are pro-Ukrainian. We are anti-war. But it's Lukashenko's fault that our country, because of his 30 years pro-Russian policy, in this position. So of course he depends a lot on cheap loans from Putin and political support from the Kremlin. And our task is to weaken the regime economically and politically. So economically, it's through sanctions, first of all, and through harmonizing sanctions with Russia, because these two dictators are using each other to circumvent sanctions. And politically, this is the policy of non-recognition. Lukashenko lost elections in 2020, and we don't have to forget about this. It's a policy of isolation. Lukashenko is political pariah. He's serving to war interests, to Putin's interests, not to Belarusian people, to Belarusian nation interests. So that's why we have to put pressure from these two directions and not to normalize what is happening in Belarus, because there are really so many countries where political prisoners exist, where the situation is also dire. And we, as Belarusian movement, have to keep focus on our country. And Belarus is not only has humanitarian problem, a political problem, it's also security issue. And while Lukashenko is governing there and serving to Putin's interest, our country will be constant source of instability, of threats to our European neighbors. And we have to show to the regime that we are not going to tolerate everything that is happening, and we are going to be principled to keep our positions strong. And only this can change behavior of, because through our history, it was always like such a politics that Lukashenko took political prisoners, then mostly European countries traded these political prisoners, and people were released, sanctions were lifted, and the countries returned to business as usual. So, and circle after circle, and we have to stop this. We have to make sure that Belarus belongs to Belarusian people, that we are not subjugated by Russia. We want to choose our future by ourselves.
On the sanctions, so another leading European opposition figure is Yulia Navalny, and she is actively saying, please don't put sanctions on Russia because they harm ordinary Russians. Are sanctions harming ordinary Belarusians? And if they are, why is that something that you think should continue?
Look, of course, to some extent, sanctions harming people. That's why sanctions have to be smart and wise. Sanctions that are targeting pockets of Lukashenko's regime, his oligarchs. And our task is to provide all the necessary data. Who is involved in war, in military stuff producing, who is helping to circumvent sanctions, who is, working with foreign businesses trying to sell Russian under sanctions goods, for example. And of course, people understand that sanctions is not good. I'm the first person who want the sanctions to be lifted, but sanctions are conditioned. And Lukashenko's regime has to solve the political and humanitarian problem in our country so that sanctions might be revised. But peculiarity of Belarusian nation is that people understand who is guilty in the sanctions. They don't blame Western countries on imposing sanctions. And we are urging our democratic partners to punish regime, but not to punish people. I mean, give visas to Belarusian people, keep the borders opened, give more opportunities, for example, for Belarusian students to study abroad, help us to keep this eye-to-eye contacts with the Belarusians. So show us European perspectives, show Belarusians that you are not abandoned, you are not left one-to-one with the dictators. We're trying to help you. So encourage people to continue, but simultaneously show that you are doing everything possible to punish regime, to bring perpetrators to accountability for their crimes. And this will be perceived as by Belarusians as like normal practice. Punish regime, helping people, okay, sanctions for the regime, not for people. And here I have to say also that Lukashenko understands his fragile situation, that people don't support him, and his policy is not like to make people feel bad about sanctions. He's trying to keep salaries on a normal level, just not to cause some unrest, for example.
Because that would hurt him
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
people felt the pain.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And do you agree with Navalny that the sanctions in Russia should be lifted, or do you think that they should be kept because of Russia's war on Ukraine?
Look, it's up to Russian people or Russian opposition to have the particular rhetoric, because the context of Russia and Belarus are different. Because Belarusians as nation, we are consolidated against regime, against Lukashenko, or we have consolidated pro-Ukrainian position. So that's why we cannot influence perception of the Russians, of the situation around them. It's up to them, of course, to decide. But I would like the Russians tell more about Ukraine, about the victory, because for sure this is the Russia that is guilty in this war. Russia here is invaders. So, of course, maybe people are not responsible for the crimes of regime, but I don't want to judge them. But we see how many Russians are supporting, Putin's and these imperialistic ambitions. So it's difficult to say. And sometimes I hear that, for example, changes in Belarus can start from changes with Russia. Until changes in Russia will happen, nothing will happen in Belarus. But I see the situation that changes in Russia might happen from changes in my country, in Belarus. Because I remember how in 2020, uprising in Belarus sparked some unrest in Russia as well. So our society is smaller, is more maybe organized, and we can show example maybe to Russian movement inside Russia or outside Russia, just for actions.
If Lukashenko were to fall, I presume you would go home straight away? You would take your family back to Belarus?
Of course, I want to return to Belarus and together with Belarusians rebuild everything that Lukashenko has been ruining for all these 30 years. I'm pretty sure that Belarus can be a prosperous and modern country with normal government that taking care about national identity, about people. And
in that scenario, would you assume the presidency? Like, would you be?
Look, my task is to, together with Belarusians, to organize free and fair elections where people can choose the person they want to choose.
So that would be the first task.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The first step to democratic changes, free and fair elections, a new constitution that restricts power of the president, because now we have super presidential republic. Lukashenko changed our constitution back in 1996. We want parliamentary republic, and of course a lot of work will have to be done to achieve this. But I see that our society is ready for this change, and it's the most important. We are now learning actually how to live in democracy. We build alternative institutions of power in exile, showed such a high level of solidarity, helping each other. So they will be very well embedded in new democratic rules.
You've been in exile many years now. Over that time, we've seen parts of Europe's patience start to wear thin with both Ukraine, maybe even yourself, and populism start to take hold, no doubt fed by Russia. Does this concern you? Are you worried about what this means for your ability to keep building this in exile?
Look, of course, I understand that all people want peace. They don't want wars in the world. But it's a responsibility of every person that lives in a democratic country to understand. On the example of Belarus, on the example of Ukraine, the dictators might be only stopped. They might be only fought. They cannot be appeased. Dictators cannot be re-educated. That if they win one nation, one country, they will go further. And we already see how this Russian propaganda trying to poison the minds of people in democratic countries, just saying, why do you have to care about Ukraine? Why do you have to care about Belarus? It's like, live your lives in wonderful countries, but if you don't protect those who are on the front line of fight between democracy and dictatorship can come, or tyranny can come in your country as well, very unnoticeably. Let propaganda to brainwash you. Of course, people are tired. They very often hear about this feeling of fatigue. And maybe people sometimes want to close the issue, but we have to solve the problem. The problem is in imperialistic ambitions of Russia, in desire of dictators to govern like everywhere, even like if it's only in the minds of people. So that's why it's not only the governments of democratic countries who are responsible for helping those nations who are fighting, but also ordinary people, big businesses, IT companies. You have to understand that it's fight between evil and the good, and your task to be on the side of good.
And just finally, it's nice to see you back in London again. It's such a treat.
Thanks.
You were awarded a Magnitsky Prize last week, you and Syarhei, and very well deserved. Your husband put out a rather strange statement after this, saying that he wasn't told by you and your team. What is happening there? Is everything okay?
Actually, sometimes miscommunication is happening, and it caused some troubles or turbulence in democratic forces. So I think this issue with the Magnitsky Award will not grow. Is like in a big problem. We have a wonderful relationship with my husband, but maybe my husband may be still looking for his place, or he's a blogger, or he's a politician, and I fully understand this, and my task is to support him and to decrease some moments of turbulence in our communication.
Yeah, I think very few people would understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
Sviatlana, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Latika.
You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.